Since the old man's gone, as the eldest son, I'm pretty much the rule maker now. Listen up, the inheritance is all ours. Mom and Nolan get nothing, so just be ready for that. Sorry about this, but Ryan would probably be happier this way. It's better for Aaron, who always put Ryan first, to inherit everything than for it to go to useless Olivia and Nolan. Aaron and his wife, Grace, even as Ryan grew weaker, never came to see him, despite being asked to visit many times. And then after the funeral, they show up, only to say unbelievable things like they're taking all the inheritance. Aaron and Grace's unbelievable behavior left Nolan, the second son, visibly upset, and rightly so. We had always strived to do everything for Ryan's sake, but Aaron and Grace never pitched in. The idea of them getting the inheritance was intolerable. Of course, we never intended to give them everything, but even a portion was too much to bear. While pondering this, Nolan opened. Listen, his mouth to speak. The words he then uttered turned Aaron and Grace's faces pale. I am Olivia, a 71-year-old housewife. I live with my husband and Nolan. My husband, Ryan, comes from a family that owns a major corporation. As a second son, he didn't take over as CEO, but he still had substantial assets. Yet despite his wealth, Ryan was always strict about money. He never tolerated wastefulness. In fact, he encouraged savings. We believed that having money was good, but wastefulness was not. So we always treated money with care. Aaron and Grace, however, didn't see it our way. They were rather extravagant, often spending on unnecessary things and indulging in luxuries. It wouldn't have been an issue if they had managed their finances. But after spending recklessly, we're in financial trouble. They often came to us saying, on this day, Aaron and Grace had come to our house together. Nolan, not wanting to see them, had gone out. Again? I thought, exasperated. Ignoring our disapproval, Aaron approached Ryan. Dad, we're struggling with our finances this month. Could you help us out a bit? Ryan frowned at Nolan's words. He was too frustrated with Aaron and Grace's reckless spending. Then Grace spoke up, trying to persuade Ryan. You know we have Colton, too. He's about to enter high school. He wants to go to a prestigious private school, but private schools are expensive, right? Colton's your beloved grandson, isn't he? Maybe you could help a little. What do you mean by that? The audacity of their request was astounding. Despite needing help, their attitude was incredibly brazen. But Colton wasn't to blame. It was all due to Aaron and Grace's selfishness. All right, if Colton is in trouble, I'll help, but no wasteful spending, and don't let Colton suffer. Ryan had always adored Colton. So when Colton was in need, he couldn't help but offer financial assistance. Aaron and Grace knew this and exploited it, using Colton as their reason. It was the same story over and over. Later, we agreed to give him the money. Per Ryan's instructions, I transferred a reasonable amount to Aaron and Grace's account. We knew something had to change in our lives, but nothing seemed to work out. Then, more misfortune struck. Ryan collapsed. Nolan, who was there, called an ambulance and Ryan was taken to the hospital. He was diagnosed with cancer. Quite advanced, and the treatment isn't guaranteed to be effective. We were devastated by this news, but resolved to support Ryan to the end. I went to the hospital every day. Nolan, despite working, spent his days off in Ryan's hospital room. But Ryan looked so lonely. Aaron and his family never visited him. Ryan grew increasingly worn out, unable to see Colton, whom he adored. Unable to bear seeing Ryan like this, I contacted Aaron and Grace. I'd like you to come visit me with Colton. But Aaron and Grace responded with, it's a hassle, and never came. Ryan looks so lonely. Could you at least bring Colton? Ryan has done so much for you. I asked Aaron and Grace to visit whenever I saw them, but they refused, saying, we're busy. Colton has high school exams. We don't have time to cater to Ryan, who won't live long. It's true, Dad helped us, but we have our lives to live. Sorry, but you'll have to give up, they said with cold words. Is Colton doing well? I wish to see him just once, Ryan would mutter sadly. It was painful to hear. Ryan's difficult battle with cancer lasted about a year. The treatment took a heavy toll on him. Eventually, after a long struggle, Ryan passed away. The loss was indescribable. Nolan supported me, even though he must have been hurting too. I should have helped with the funeral arrangements, but I was too overwhelmed with grief and left everything to Nolan. Mom, you were always by Dad's side. I wasn't able to be there because of work. Now, lean on me. Nolan's words were incredibly comforting, but Aaron and Grace never offered to help with the funeral preparations. Even when informed of Ryan's death, they didn't respond. Aaron, Ryan's own flesh and blood, was so heartless it hurt. Ryan's funeral was a quiet affair, tended only by close family and friends. Aaron and Grace didn't show up even on the day of the funeral. We were too busy to worry about them. After the funeral, carrying the flowers and sympathy cards home, Nolan and I were placing them on the altar when the doorbell rang. Who could it be at this time? We wondered, exchanging glances. The front door opened. Only a few people have keys to our house. We sighed, knowing who it was. It was Aaron and his family. Seeing Colton after such a long time felt strange. "Sorry we couldn't make it to the funeral. We had a family trip planned," Aaron said, casually entering the living room. Following Aaron into the living room were Grace and Colton. Astonished by their audacity, I was even more taken aback when Aaron said something unbelievable. "Now that the old man's gone, as the eldest, I'm pretty much in charge." "Listen up, the entire inheritance is ours." "Mom and Nolan get nothing, just so you know." "What?" I blurted out in disbelief. "Sorry about this, but Ryan would be happier this way." "It's better for the inheritance to go to Aaron, who always considered Ryan first, than to useless Olivia and Nolan." I was stunned by Aaron and Grace's outrageous claims. After leaving everything to us and enjoying their easy life, they now showed up to claim Ryan's inheritance. I couldn't bear the thought of even a part of the inheritance ending up in Aaron and Grace's hands. While we were struggling with this dilemma, Nolan suddenly spoke up, flipping the situation. "I've been thinking, Colton doesn't really look like Aaron." Everyone, including Aaron's family and myself, was shocked by this statement. Why would he say such a thing now? There's no time for this. Nolan, what are you saying? Colton is definitely Aaron's child. He just takes after me." Grace reacted most strongly to Nolan's casual remark, her face turning pale as if a taboo subject had been broached. "Why are you so flustered? I just mentioned it casually because I was curious. Also, Colton doesn't seem to resemble Grace either, or is it just me?" Nolan suggested I take a closer look at Colton's face. Sure enough, he didn't seem to resemble Nolan or Grace, especially since Grace claimed, "He looks like me." That statement didn't seem quite right. Aaron, apparently thinking the same, turned pale and glared at Grace. "Aaron, are you accusing me of cheating?" "Could Colton not be my son?" Aaron said, grabbing Grace by the collar. Grace frantically denied it. "No, that's not true." But her denial lacked credibility. The situation was escalating, and without intervention, it could spiral out of control. Eventually, Nolan stepped in. "Calm down. It'll all be clear once we do the DNA test," we decided. Grace kept arguing until the end, saying, "There's no need for that," and "doubting our parental bond?" Although he was complaining about this, Aaron seemed to have a strong will and decided to take a DNA test with Colton in the near future, without being swayed by Grace's words. For a few days, I had little contact with Aaron and Grace, mostly spending my time sorting through Ryan's belongings. Then one day, the doorbell rang again. Nolan, who was with me, wondered, who could it be, as we heard the front door opening. "Mom, are you here?" Aaron asked as he entered the living room. It seemed he had come alone today. It was unusual for Aaron to visit our house by himself, so I made coffee and offered him a seat. As he sat down, Aaron, with a look of humiliation, placed a document on the table. The document Aaron placed on the table was the DNA test result. It stated that there was no paternal relationship between Colton and Aaron. In other words, Colton wasn't Aaron's child. "I've been deceived by Grace. Colton must be the child of her lover. She betrayed me," Aaron exclaimed, his face turning red with anger. Certainly cheating is wrong, and Aaron may deserve some pity for being deceived. However, I couldn't sympathize with him. We hadn't forgotten Aaron's past unreasonable behavior. Grace's betrayal didn't justify taking Aaron's side. I won't be satisfied until I've thoroughly confronted Grace. Please help me. Your oldest son was deceived, and you must be upset too. We need to unite as a family now. Aaron pleaded, taking her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to cooperate with Aaron. My feelings were cooling even more. Seeing this, Nolan spoke up. Sorry, but I can't support you, Aaron. You betrayed Dad too. We haven't forgotten that. Aaron was one of those who abandoned Ryan. If he had supported Ryan then, maybe his loneliness would have been lessened. Thinking of this, I couldn't easily forgive Aaron. That was a different time. I was trying to spend time with my family, but they're not our family anymore. Aaron pleaded desperately for our help. Despite our reluctance, we agreed to call Grace. Since the decision to do the DNA test, Grace had been taking Colton out often, rarely coming home. Grace didn't show her face even when Aaron contacted her, so I decided to contact her, using Ryan's inheritance as a pretext. I wouldn't normally do this, nor did I want to, but I did because I have a secret plan, Nolan said. Soon after, the doorbell rang. It seemed Grace and Colton had arrived. As I opened the door to let them in, Grace frowned at Aaron's jacket hanging next to the door. You didn't tell me Aaron was here. Did you deceive me, Olivia? Grace exclaimed, about to leave with Colton. If they left now, calling them under the guise of discussing the inheritance would be pointless. Just as I was wondering how to keep them, Nolan stepped forward. Wait, Grace, calm down. If you leave now, things might get worse. It's better to talk here where we can control Aaron than alone. It's in your best interest. Certainly, if Grace and Aaron were to talk alone, the outcome could be unpredictable. Aaron might even become violent in his anger. In such cases, probably only Nolan could restrain him. Convinced by Nolan's reasoning, Grace and her family entered the house. As they passed through the living room door, Aaron glared at them. In response, Nolan, urging calmness, said, "Settle down." He then seated everyone and served coffee. Grace and her family looked visibly uncomfortable, but we managed to calm the situation. At that time, I didn't understand why Nolan had chosen such a complicated approach. Why did he need to gather us all here? Wouldn't talking to them individually have worked? But later, thanks to a trump card Nolan revealed, I understood why he had gathered us in that place. The room fell silent. Both Aaron and Grace seemed to be gauging each other's reactions, unable to bear the tension. "I'm so sorry," Grace suddenly apologized. "I never intended for this to happen." "I was deceived too," Grace said, crying and recounting her story. Her affair had begun over a decade ago, with a colleague from her workplace at the time. She had been in a relationship with him even before meeting Aaron. However, her lover was married with children. They still loved each other, Grace claimed. They drifted apart, and that's when Grace met Aaron. Aaron fell for her at first sight and passionately confessed his feelings. Grace, whose feelings for her lover were fading, started dating Aaron and eventually married him. About a year later, Grace reconnected with her distant lover. She hadn't expected to meet him again, as she had quit her job by then. Their rekindled romance led to Grace becoming enthralled once more. That's when she became pregnant with Colton. However, around the same time, her lover moved away with his family, effectively abandoning Grace. She knew it was wrong not to tell Aaron that Colton wasn't his child, but she didn't have the confidence to raise a child alone. So Grace lied that Colton was Aaron's child, and continued that lie. If he hadn't left, I would have been honest about the affair and that Colton wasn't Aaron's child. It's all his fault. Grace continued crying. Colton was silent, shocked by the revelation. "That doesn't excuse what you did. You betrayed me. You destroyed my happiness." Grace's excuses seemed incoherent. Even Aaron couldn't accept such explanations. Aaron and Grace started arguing and grabbing each other, escalating into a fight. But as if to admonish Aaron and Grace, Nolan claps his hands. "If you want to fight, go ahead, but I have something important to say too. I can't stop thinking about Dad's inheritance." At Nolan's words, Aaron and Grace immediately stopped their quarrel. Perhaps the mention of the inheritance they were so fixated on was enough to calm their anger. Seemingly agreeing to a truce, the two sit down. Seeing them seated, Nolan smiles with satisfaction and pulls out an envelope from his pocket. This is Dad's will. He had it written by a trustworthy lawyer during his time in the hospital. It clearly states how the inheritance is to be divided. I was unaware of the existence of a will. Probably Ryan had directly asked Nolan to arrange for a lawyer. Nolan opens the envelope and begins to read the contents of the letter inside. What he reads is astonishing. The inheritance will be divided with half going to my wife Olivia and 1/4 each to my son Nolan and my grandson Colton. The atmosphere changes dramatically as Nolan reads this line. Aaron turning pale. "That can't be right," he exclaims. He lunges at Nolan, snatching the will and reading it, his eyes widening to their limits. "How can this be? Why is there nothing for me? I'm the eldest son." He had always assumed with certainty that he would receive a larger share of the inheritance, yet hearing that he wasn't allocated even a small part, Aaron couldn't possibly accept it. However, Aaron, disheartened that the content didn't change no matter how many times he read it, slumped to the ground. Taking the will from Aaron, I reread it to confirm, and it seemed there was no mistake in what Nolan had read. "Naturally, Aaron, you and your wife had received substantial support from Dad, right? Dad was well aware that all the money was being used for your frivolities. That's why he decided not to leave anything for you." Nolan spoke calmly. Ryan's secret trump card had indeed managed to plunge Aaron into despair. "By the way, I've already informed your parents as per Dad's instructions. The portion of the inheritance going to Colton will be temporarily held by your parents, so it's better not to think you can misuse Colton's inheritance." "How could this be?" It seemed that Nolan and Ryan had carefully acted to prevent selfish wastage as before. In that case, surely the portion allocated to Colton would be used for his future. Ryan had been concerned about Colton until the end. Ryan's inheritance would surely nourish Colton. The two issues that surrounded us, Grace's infidelity and Ryan's inheritance, were finally resolved. We no longer needed to devote time to Aaron and Grace. After the discussion, Aaron's family returned home, looking dejected. What happens next is for them to discuss among themselves. I believed it would turn out well for us. As expected, Aaron and Grace ended up divorcing. We who had heard Grace's confession that day became undeniable witnesses, and Aaron demanded substantial compensation from Grace. Further disputes arose over the custody of Colton. Both wanted the custody solely for themselves, knowing that Colton would eventually secure the inheritance. Myself, Nolan, and Grace's parents intervened in the negotiations. Eventually, it was decided that Colton would stay with Grace's parents until he came of age. Once the divorce was finalized, Aaron started visiting our house frequently, saying, "Let's live together." Feeling unable to accept him as family after all this, we moved out, almost fleeing from Aaron. We changed our contact details, so it is unlikely that Aaron will be able to reach us. Grace, for her part, seems to be having a tough time. From what I've heard, her parents are furious over the incident. They paid the compensation, but until she repays it in full, she's not even allowed to see Colton. Meanwhile, we are living a happy life. Following Ryan's philosophy, we carefully save the inheritance we received and make sure not to squander it, even though we have money. Since then, Nolan has been working diligently and was recognized for his abilities. John from BIL asked him, "Why don't you come to work for our company?" So he changed jobs. Now he seems to be an executive at the company where John is the CEO. I still consider Colton my grandson, despite everything that happened. So I asked Grace's parents if I could visit him. He recently got into his first choice high school, so we celebrated by going out for a delicious meal. The incident with Aaron and Grace remains a deep emotional scar, but it also taught us the importance of relationships. I will use this lesson to live my life going forward.